California is famous for its beaches, tech hubs, and farms. But over the last 2 decades, it has become just as famous for something far more worrying: an increasingly fragile relationship with water. Drought alerts, emergency restrictions, and record-breaking wildfires are no longer occasional shocks, but a recurring feature of life across much of the state. California's struggle with water is not a new story. It is an old one that stretches back thousands of years and is rooted in the state's unusual geography and climate. The modern crisis is basically an ancient structural problem made worse by hotter temperatures, more people, and a much larger economy. To understand what is going wrong, it is essential to first understand where California's huge demand for water actually comes from, and where the water itself is supposed to come from. Today, California's population is close to 40 million people, and it will grow only slowly through the 2020s. That many people obviously need a lot of water, but when all withdrawals and environmental flows are counted, cities and towns only account for roughly 10% of the state's total water use, while the rest goes to agriculture and the environment. Put another way, even though people in Los Angeles, San Diego, San Francisco, Sacramento, and other cities worry constantly about taps running dry, urban use is only a relatively small slice of the overall pie. The much larger human user of water is California's enormous agricultural sector, which still generates more than $50 billion a year in farm gate revenue and supports hundreds of thousands of jobs. Agriculture uses roughly 40% of California's total water and about 80% of the developed water that is actively captured and managed for human purposes. Farming dominates water demand in part because California is one of the most productive food regions on the planet, with irrigated land stretching across the Central Valley and beyond. Because of rich soils in Central Valley and a warm Mediterranean-style climate, California produces roughly 1/3 of the country's vegetables and roughly 2/3 of its fruits and nuts. Central Valley alone accounts for a very large share of national farm output by value, more than 8%, and produces roughly a quarter of nation's supply of food, even though it is only a small part of U.S. land area. More than 400 different crops are grown across the state. Among all these crops, almonds attract a huge amount of attention because of its scale, export role, and water needs. California supplies around 80% of the world's commercial almonds, making the state the clear global center of almond industry and generating $6 billion in exports a year. Since the mid-1990s, almond acreage and output have multiplied many times over as demand surged in places like India, East Asia, and Europe, and almonds have become one of California's top agricultural export products. But almonds are a water-intensive crop. It consumes around 10% of entire amount of water on its own alone. Feed crops, such as alfalfa, pasture, and silage corn take up to 25% of agricultural water in California, even though they generate only a small share of overall farm revenue, mainly to feed dairy cows and beef cattle, tying California's water story closely to livestock production. When pasture and other feed crops are included, close to 80% of the water in the state is effectively committed to agriculture and the industries it supports. This concentration of water means that droughts in California, they can disrupt a farm sector that underpins food supplies for millions of people in the United States and abroad. Because California is both the most populous U.S. state and home to the country's largest agricultural economy, any major cut to its water supplies can have unusually large economic and environmental ripple effects across the nation. California receives almost all of its water in the form of rainfall and snow, plus a smaller share from rivers, such as Colorado. This precipitation is extremely uneven. Moist westerly winds from the Pacific Ocean slam into the state's mountain ranges, forcing air upward, cooling it, and wringing out moisture, which is why many of the wettest places in California are on the west-facing slopes of mountains. The northwest of the state has a generally wet, temperate climate, with some coastal and mountain areas receiving annual rainfall totals 1,300 millimeters that can easily be more than double what a city like London sees in a typical year. Storms arriving from North Pacific usually deliver generous rainfall and snow to northern and central parts of the state, while the southern end of the valley and inland deserts receive much less. Towering ranges such as the Sierra Nevada, the Cascades, and the Klamath Mountains develop heavy winter snowpacks, which then melt in spring and summer and feed the state's rivers, tributaries, and reservoirs. Overall, California geography means that roughly 75% of the state's available water supply originates in that northern third above Sacramento, where only about 20% of the population lives, leaving 80% of residents in the drier southern two-thirds that generate only around 25% of local water. This basic mismatch is probably the single most important structural fact behind California's water politics. As a result, California has had little choice but to move massive volumes of water from the north to the south to satisfy demand in cities and on farms. On or flow into California in a typical year, including rain, snow, and imports from rivers. Half of that is taken up by natural ecosystems, lost to evaporation, or flows back out to the Pacific, while the other half is consumed by people, again split around 80 toward agriculture and 20 toward cities and industry. That means 100 million acre-feet of human use is only an average. Actual usable water can swing by around 40 million acre-feet from year to year, depending on weather conditions, meaning that the effective supply can change by about 40%, enough to dramatically reshape what farmers can plant and what reservoirs can deliver. To visualize that scale, 40 million acre-feet is enough water to cover an entire West Virginia in a layer of water roughly a foot deep. Seasonal timing makes things even more complicated. Most of California's precipitation still falls during the cooler winter months between roughly December and February, with mountain snowpacks historically peaking around early spring. If those winter storms fail and snowpack arrives thin or melts early, the consequences echo through the rest of the year and sometimes for several years afterward, especially when reservoirs are already low. Since 2000, broader American Southwest has been experiencing what many climate scientists describe as a long, severe drought episode that lines up with what historical records would call a megadrought. Studies that reconstruct soil moisture over the last 1,000 to 1,200 years suggest that the period since 2000 ranks among the driest multi-decade stretches in that entire record, with several of the very driest individual years clustered in the early 2000s and the early 2020s. The driest year in California's recorded history was the year 2020 to 2021, driest in over a century. Prior to this, the late 2011 to 2014 period was the driest in California's history since records began. Rainfall and snow across much of California have tended to run below average through many of those 25 years, while higher temperatures have increased evaporation and thirst in soils, amplifying the stress on rivers and reservoirs. This prolonged dryness has put enormous pressure on California's north-south water transfer system. California spent much of the 20th century building one of the most complex engineered water systems on Earth. The Central Valley Project, built and operated by the federal government, is one of the two backbone systems. It stores water behind big dams in the northern and central parts of the state and delivers it mainly to farms in the Central Valley, supporting irrigation on millions of acres of cropland. The California State Water Project, run by state itself, is the other major spine, sending water hundreds of miles to supply both agriculture and large urban areas in Southern California, including Los Angeles, Orange County, the Inland Empire, and San Diego. These projects involve dozens of major dams, reservoirs, and thousands of miles of canals, pumping plants and pipelines, aqueducts designed to collect water in wet years, move at long distances, and serving tens of millions of people in vast areas of farmland and smooth out the swings between flood and drought. On top of that, the Los Angeles Aqueduct pulls water from the Owens River and eastern Sierra Nevada into the Los Angeles Basin, while the Colorado River Aqueduct brings additional supplies from the Colorado River system on the California-Arizona border. All of this has led many observers to describe California as perhaps the most heavily engineered water landscape in the United States. However, Engineered plumbing only works if the sources feeding it keep flowing. On Colorado River, a combination of long-term overuse and warming-driven drought has pulled major reservoirs like Lake Mead and Lake Powell to levels far below their historical highs. At Lake Mead, water levels in 2024 were more than 150 feet below the official full elevation. Projections show that these reservoirs will likely stay in at least a Tier 1 shortage condition through the mid-2020s, with a real risk that, after a couple of drier-than-normal years, levels could slip toward thresholds that threaten hydropower generation and force deeper water cuts. While current shortage rules mainly force cuts on Arizona and Nevada first, continued decline would eventually bring significant pressure on California's Colorado River allocation as well. Key reservoirs such as Lake Shasta and Lake Oroville were driven to historically low levels during the intense 2020 to 2022 drought, with storage dipping to roughly half of capacity or even less in some months. A sequence of powerful atmospheric river storms in early 2023 temporarily eased statewide drought indicators. But this relief did not fully erase long-term groundwater depletion or the structural imbalance between water supply and demand. By 2025, drought conditions had already returned across parts of the state, and some projections suggest that swings between flood and drought will keep intensifying as the climate warms. Even Sierra Nevada snowpack measured in early spring came in well below historical averages, sometimes less than half of what water managers expect at that time of year, sharply reducing the volume of meltwater flowing into rivers, canals, and reservoirs during summer. Warmer temperatures also mean that more precipitation falls as rain rather than snow, and that snow melts earlier, which effectively shrinks the natural storage role of the mountains and forces reservoirs and groundwater to carry a heavier burden. Part of this downturn has been linked to recurring La Nina conditions in the Pacific over the first half of 2020s, which cooled parts of the tropical ocean, altered evaporation, and nudged the jet stream northward away from California, where storms tend to track into the Pacific Northwest and Western Canada instead of hitting California head-on, leaving the state with fewer storms, longer dry spells, and hotter, windier conditions that favor wildfires. Higher temperatures through what describe as evaporative stress. As the atmosphere warms, it can hold more water, and it effectively pulls more moisture out of soil, plants, rivers, and reservoirs, even if rainfall does not change much. This vicious cycle: less snowpack, more rapid drying. With overall warming, soils dry out faster, vegetation becomes more stressed, and each dry year starts to feel harsher than the last, and hotter heat waves makes each drought more damaging to ecosystems. Water agencies often respond by pushing for aggressive reductions of water up to 35% in urban use, with stricter rules on outdoor watering and landscaping. For agriculture, the impact is even sharper. Farmers either fallow land or pump more groundwater. In very dry years, thousands of acres can be left without irrigation, costing billions of dollars and thousands of jobs. Groundwater has historically been the safety valve for California's Farm Belt, but overpumping has caused groundwater levels to fall, wells to run dry, and land to subside in parts of the Central Valley, leading California to adopt the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, which will force many basins to cut pumping over the 2020s and 2030s, which means that more farmland will likely be idled permanently over the next 2 decades. Irrigated land could eventually be retired or converted to lower water uses, implying a structural shift in the state's agricultural footprint. This will reshape rural economies, crop choices, and habitat. California has no easy water fix. Options like mandatory cutbacks, recycled water, new reservoirs, floodplain restoration, and coastal desalination all face high costs. Urban conservation has lowered per capita use, but total demand keeps rising with population. Agricultural efficiency and crop switching help, but aren't enough. To prevent catastrophe, the state must tighten groundwater rules, modernize infrastructure, shift crop patterns, scale up recycling, and prepare for wilder wet-dry swings, fast, while preserving its role as a global food powerhouse in a hotter, drier future.